Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. The UFC recently announced a welterweight matchup between Khamzat Chimaev and Gilbert Burns on the UFC 273 pay-per-view in April, and I am so hyped for this fight. I'm excited the UFC finally announced it, but I have one massive issue with this fight, and it's super annoying to me, and I thought that it was notable enough that it was worth making a video about it. So before I get to that, I kind of got to set it up a bit. So you guys know Khamzat Chimaev came in, he fought 2 fights, I think it was within 10 days. He fought his initial fight against John Phillips, submitted him via Darce choke, and then he took a fight against Reese McKee 10 days later and destroyed him. And that's kind of what made Khamzat Chimaev blow up, the fact that he took 2 fights so close together and just dominated both guys. Then a few months later, he fought Gerald Meerschaert and brutally KO'd him. It was a decent step up in competition, better than either of the guys he had fought previously, and he absolutely starched him with the right hand in the first round, put him out. And it was already discussed before the Gerald Meerschaert fight, and this is very rare that this ever happens. The UFC came out and said that if Khamzat Chimaev defeats Gerald Meerschaert, that Khamzat was going to fight Damian Maia like a month or 2 later. And it's very rare. I've never seen it in the entire time that I've been watching MMA, the UFC booking fights before, 2 fights in advance. It was crazy that they said, they were disrespecting Gerald Meerschaert and saying, well, if Khamzat wins this fight, we already got him as his next opponent lined up. It's going to be Damian Maia, which was just absolutely insane. So anyway, he fights Gerald Meerschaert, knocks him out. Then all of a sudden, the talk of Damian Maia kind of goes away, which is weird. Why did it even come out to begin with? And there is a matchup made between Khamzat Chimaev and Leon Edwards. It was scheduled for December of 2020. And this was a fight that a lot of people were really looking forward to, because it's very rare that you see a prospect come in, look dominant, not against the best of competition, and then all of a sudden get a massive step up the ladder and fight a guy like Leon Edwards, who was ranked number 2, number 1, somewhere around there at the time, top 3 in the welterweight division. And it was a guy that was unranked getting a top 3 welterweight. It was unheard of. We all know what happened there. I think Leon originally pulled out of the December fight, or they both couldn't make the December fight, which was super disappointing. But the UFC was desperate for this matchup. They moved it to January. They said, okay, a month later, hopefully they can fight. They end up rescheduling this fight. It got canceled again. But the UFC was so desperate. Khamzat pulled out of the January fight, but Leon was still ready to fight and wanted to stay on the January card. But the UFC was so desperate for Khamzat Chimaev versus Leon Edwards, and I'm going to get to why in a second. I've talked about it a little bit before, that they rebooked the fight for March. We were going to get Khamzat Chimaev versus Leon Edwards in March. Unfortunately, that didn't happen again. Khamzat Chimaev pulled out again. Then there was some talk of his retirement. And the reason the UFC was so desperate to book Khamzat Chimaev versus Leon Edwards is they wanted to fast-track Khamzat Chimaev to a welterweight title shot. They saw how, hot his name was and that he was getting very popular, and they saw the skill set. It looked very good against lesser competition, and they were just ready to throw him to the wolves. Apparently, he said he was ready, and if he was able to beat a guy like Leon Edwards, they were going to give him a title shot. So after that whole Leon Edwards debacle, which I'm still upset that we never got to see, he finally returned October of 2021 against Li Jingliang, which is more of a natural progression. Li Jingliang, outside the top 10 at welterweight, but still a ranked top 15 guy. And he went out there and destroyed Li Jingliang in the first round, took him down, dominated him on the ground, and eventually submitted him. Dominant performance. And then, another thing that really irritates me, and I guess, there could be a bunch of factors, the reason this happened, is Khamzat is a guy who said, I want to stay active, and that's kind of how he became popular. And then, you go from the end of October to, it takes all the way till the end of February, early March for the UFC to announce his next opponent, as they were booking, double opponents for Gerald Meerschaert and the Damian Maia fight before. And now it takes almost 6 months to get his next opponent. So that's one of my complaints, but that's not what this video is about. So after that, they finally announced recently that we're going to get Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns. And there was one detail when this was originally being reported as being targeted that I could not find anywhere. Until recently on a UFC broadcast, they showed the UFC 273 main card, and on there they showed Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns. Underneath of their names, they showed 3 rounds. And that is my massive complaint about this fight. This is a potential #1 contender fight. I think it is a #1 contender fight, especially for Khamzat Chimaev. And it's only going to be 3 rounds. We've only ever seen, Khamzat Chimaev's only ever been to the second round in his MMA career. And in the UFC, he's only been in the first round because he's gotten such quick finishes. And if Khamzat Chimaev is going to be fighting for a title next against Kamaru Usman, the welterweight champion, obviously Kamaru Usman is going to fight Leon Edwards, so depending on what happens there. But if Kamaru Usman keeps the belt, Khamzat Chimaev beats Gilbert Burns, then we are going to see him fight for the belt. And, you know, it should be 5 rounds. Why are we not getting this at 5 rounds? And for those of you who don't know, years ago, the UFC didn't even have main events as 5 rounds. It used to be only title fights were 5 rounds. And then they decided, okay, we're going to make all main events 5 rounds. And then just recently, I think it was just last year was the first fight. Yeah, I believe it was. The first non-title, non-main event that we got was 5 rounds. Was Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards, which was the featured fight on the pay-per-view. Then after that, we got Robbie Lawler versus Nick Diaz for 5 rounds. Just ridiculous, just ridiculous. And just recently, RDA versus Renato Moicano. So we can get those 3 fights that are relatively unimportant. We can get those at 5 rounds, but we can't get Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns at 5 rounds. And I know there's a chance that one of these guys can get a finish in the first round, you know, second or third even. But if it does go to decision, it's really going to irk me that we don't have 2 more rounds. There's so many fights. Just recently, one off the top of my head, Michael Chiesa versus Sean Brady. I know that wasn't nowhere near as important as this fight, but the tide was starting to change in that 3rd round, and I would have loved to seen that fight go 2 more rounds. You know, and this fight is much more relevant and important to the division. One of these guys is probably going to fight for the belt next, depending on what happens. If Kamaru Usman defeats Leon Edwards, one of these guys is almost definitely getting the next title shot, because there's really not a lot of guys available that haven't already fought Kamaru Usman and potentially lost to Kamaru Usman twice. So on top of that, I just really want to see, you know, we've seen Gilbert Burns go 5 rounds before. If this does go to decision, and Gilbert Burns is not easy to put away by any means, you know, obviously this fight could go either way, but I want to see Khamzat Chimaev's gas tank tested, just like we want to see every title contender's gas tank tested. And I know, you know, he may get the finish, but still, if it doesn't, or even imagine this, imagine it's a razor close fight and it ends up being a split decision, whoever it goes to, that's irrelevant. Imagine it's razor close, and now we have a 29-28 victory, and people are saying, well, I think Burns won. Well, I think Chimaev won. It should have been 5 rounds. I think it's egregious that the UFC is not making it 5 rounds. And, you know, I know maybe there's not going to be a whole lot of outrage out there because people are just so excited to see Khamzat Chimaev back in action. I'm super excited to see him back in action. But it's just really disappointing to me that this #1 contender fight is not a 5-round fight. I think any fight that has, even if it's on the fringe of title implications, I think it needs to be 5 rounds. I think it's really important that we see the fight play out over 25 minutes if either guy is not able to get a finish. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.